What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 1. Final look.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for this week's NFL slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, let's take a look at the quarterback position. So I like Justin Herbert from the LA Chargers playing the Las Vegas Raiders, who had the 10th worst defense overall last year. They were middle of the pack defending opposing quarterbacks. Justin Herbert averaged 24.9 fantasy points per game on the season last year, getting an average of 3.7 rush attempts per game. He's going to be about 7% owned. He was on the field for 100% of the snaps last year. He's projected at 22.9 fantasy points here in week 1. He's 7,600 DraftKings salary, 800 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 52 points scored in this game, with the Chargers favored by 3.5. So I like this pick because Justin Herbert, he can get a touchdown on the ground, and he's got some fantastic wide receivers, Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, and he scored 31 fantasy points in his last game of the season last year. This guy can light it up. So I like Justin Herbert here versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Okay, now I also like Jalen Hurts. I like Kirk Cousins. But another guy I think is going to go under the radar this week that you can never discount is Aaron Rodgers from the Green Bay Packers. He's got a fantastic matchup here versus the Minnesota Vikings, who had the second worst defense overall last year, gave up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Aaron Rodgers averaged 21.8 fantasy points per game on the season last year. He got an average of 2.1 rush attempts per game. Not a mobile quarterback, but when he takes off, he can get some yards. And he's only going to be about 3% owned, projected at 19.4 fantasy points here in week 1. He's 7,000 DraftKings salary, 800 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 46.5 points scored in this game, with the Packers favored by 1.5. Now, Aaron Rodgers doesn't have the best wide receiving core right now. Allen Lazard is injured, but he's got some capable guys, and it's Aaron Rodgers. He can connect with any wide receiver out there on the field. I think he's going to go under-owned this week in a fantastic matchup. He could absolutely light up the Minnesota Vikings. So I like Aaron Rodgers here versus the Minnesota Vikings. Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. So for studs, I like Derrick Henry. I think he's got a great matchup here versus the New York Giants. Of course, Jonathan Taylor versus the Houston Texans. Another fantastic matchup for a stud. But if you want to pay down a little bit for a stud that I think is in a great spot, take a look at Alvin Kamara from the New Orleans Saints playing the Atlanta Falcons, who have the 4th worst defense overall. They gave up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing running backs last year. And Alvin Kamara was averaging 19 fantasy points per game on the season last year, getting an average of 18.5 rush attempts and 5.2 pass targets. So well over 20 targets a game or 20 touches a game. He's going to be about 15% owned, projected at 17.7 fantasy points here in week 1. He's 7,600 DraftKings salary, 900 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 43 points scored in this game, with the Saints favored by 5.5. Now, I do think that the Saints are going to take the lead in this game. could lead to more rush attempts from Alvin Kamara. He scored 21 fantasy points in his last game of the season last year, had 30 rush attempts and 2 pass targets. So I like Alvin Kamara here versus the Atlanta Falcons. Okay, everyone, it's time to announce the winner of our $25 weekly PayPal giveaway. And the winner is Cam Van Dusen. Congratulations, Cam Van Dusen. You are the winner of this week's $25 PayPal giveaway. Please reply to our comment to collect your prize.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching.
If you want to enter the drawing for $25 PayPal,
all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won.
And we'll send you $25 PayPal.
So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Now I also like Joe Mixon from the Cincinnati Bengals playing the Pittsburgh Steelers, who had a middle-of-the-pack defense overall last year, but they gave up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Joe Mixon averaged 18.6 fantasy points per game on the season last year, getting an average of 18.3 rush attempts per game and 3 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 13% owned, projected at 17.6 fantasy points here in week 1. And Joe Mixon is $7,100 DraftKings salary, $1,200 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 44.5 points scored in this game, with the Bengals favored by 6.5. So just like the New Orleans versus the Falcons, I think the Cincinnati Bengals are going to take the lead in this game, and maybe they're going to lead this game by a touchdown or more from start to finish. I think Joe Mixon is going to get a ton of carries in this one, and he scored 15, 23, and 12 fantasy points in his last 3 games last year off of 21, 14, and 17 rush attempts on top of 3, 7, and 5 pass targets. So he's getting a ton of volume. So I like Joe Mixon here versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now remember, if you want to save some salary, I liked Josh Jacobs here versus the LA Chargers, who had the 6th worst defense overall last year, gave up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Josh Jacobs averaged 15.6 fantasy points per game on the season, off of 14.5 rush attempts per game and 4.3 pass targets per game. Now, he's only going to be about 1% owned, so I think he makes a pretty good sleeper pick here in week 1. So I like Josh Jacobs. He's $6,300 DraftKings salary, $700 more on FanDuel. So I like Josh Jacobs here versus the LA Chargers. Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. So I like Justin Jefferson, but a guy that I really like here is Keenan Allen from the LA Chargers playing the Las Vegas Raiders, who had the 10th worst defense overall last year. And although they were pretty good defending opposing wide receivers, Keenan Allen averaged 16.9 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 9.8 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 7% owned, projected at 16.4 fantasy points here in week 1. He's $7,000 DraftKings salary, $400 more on FanDuel. We know Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 52 points scored in this game, with the Chargers favored by 3.5. I think this is a pretty good game to stack here in week 1. So I like Keenan Allen, who scored 11, 14, and 8 fantasy points in his last 3 games of the season last year, off of 8, 9, and 6 pass targets here versus the Las Vegas Raiders.
Real quick guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL. NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, now don't forget about Michael Pittman Jr. from the Indianapolis Colts playing the Houston Texans, who have the second worst defense overall, gave up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Michael Pittman Jr., he averaged 14.4 fantasy points per game on the season last year, getting an average of 7.6 pass targets per game. He was on the field for 88% of the snaps. He's going to be about 16% owned, projected at 15.8 fantasy points here in week 1, and he's only $5,500 DraftKings salary, $1,700 more on FanDuel, so I love that DraftKings price. Vegas thinks there's going to be 45.5 points scored in this game, with the Indianapolis Colts favored by a touchdown. Michael Pittman Jr. scored 20, 11, and 17 fantasy points in his last 3 games of the season last year, and off of 7, 6, and 12 pass targets. So he was getting a ton of volume. So I like Michael Pittman Jr. at a discount here versus the Houston Texans. Now another player that I think is underpriced is Adam Thielen from the Minnesota Vikings playing the Green Bay Packers, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They were middle-of-the-pack defending opposing wide receivers. Adam Thielen has averaged 15.6 fantasy points per game on the season last year, getting an average of 7.3 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 9% owned, projected at 13.3 fantasy points here in week 1, and he's only $5,400 DraftKings salary, $700 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 46.5 points scored in this game, with the Vikings trailing by 1.5. So I think the price tag is just too low for Adam Thielen, who we know has monster upside. So I like Adam Thielen here versus the Green Bay Packers. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. If you're looking for a stud at the slate, take a look at Mark Andrews from the Baltimore Ravens playing the New York Jets, who had the absolute worst defense overall last year, gave up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Mark Andrews averaged 18.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 9.1 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 9% owned, projected at 16.7 fantasy points here in week 1. He's $6,800 DraftKings salary, $1,100 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 44 points scored in this game, with the Ravens favored by 6.5. So this is a fantastic matchup, and Mark Andrews scored 17, 15, and 30 fantasy points in his last 3 games off of 16, 6, and 10 pass targets. So I like Mark Andrews here versus the New York Jets. Okay, if you're looking to save some salary at the tight end position, take a look at Dallas Goedert from the Philadelphia Eagles playing the Detroit Lions, who had the 2nd worst defense overall, gave up the 9th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Dallas Goedert averaged 11.4 fantasy points per game on the season last year, getting an average of 5.1 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 10% owned, projected at 11.9 fantasy points here in week 1. He's only $4,500 DraftKings salary, $1,200 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48.5 points scored in this game, with the Eagles favored by 5. Now, Dallas Goedert scored 15 and 13 fantasy points in his last 2 games off of 12 and 7 pass targets. Fantastic matchup. So I like Dallas Goedert here versus the Detroit Lions.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NFL slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again and good luck.